Welcome back. So far on this show, you've learned about the process, forming use cases, developing strategies, implementation plans, and the technology behind AI implementation. Every federal agency leader will tell you that the remaining piece of the puzzle is people. To bring you that piece, Traci DiMartini, the Chief Human Capital Officer at the IRS, and Mike Chon, Vice President and Partner for Talent Transformation in the U.S. federal market for IBM Consulting. Welcome, folks. Thanks very much for joining me. Traci, there's two tracks, I guess, that you're pursuing on this. One is using the tools themselves to improve the hiring and retention and training process at the IRS. And the other is, how do you get the people in to be able to use these tools and do the jobs that they support? Yes. How are you working through both of those tracks at the same time?
So I'm glad you saved the best for last, which is, of course, people. People, we're all about people, especially at the IRS, and this gives us the opportunity to make life infinitely easier for our workforce and also for the customers we serve, the American taxpayer. So to your first question, you know, we're looking at ways that this technology can help people answer questions quicker, kind of delve through a lot of information in a shorter amount of time. And, you know, I always come with good stats.
Yes, you always have
and
numbers
I want to give an example. Like, we had an amazing filing season in 2024 due all to our people at the IRS, because we were able to hire so many people in taxpayer services. But we also were able to invest in our chatbots, and we had a 150% increase in the chatbot usage in 2024 because we had people training the system and knowing where to pull information. Makes life a lot easier for the customer service representatives who are doing God's work on those phones, helping American taxpayers during busy seasons, during filing season. And we went up 150%. 832,000 more questions were answered this taxpayer season. Then the other piece of it is our workforce, which is fabulous. The IRS has the best workforce in the federal government. We want to train our amazing IT talent on how to take advantage of AI, which is still developing. Mm-hmm. So we need the tech talent to come into the IRS to help, but also, as you mentioned, the back end, the people that are doing the hard work. So for HR, it would be my staff looking at ways to leverage AI to maybe write classification standards. I'm still going to need the workforce to validate it and to teach it what to do, but it's so exciting to think some of the tasks that are very labor intensive could be made much simpler. And that's where my good friend Mike Chon comes in, because we have partnered at other agencies on figuring out how to leverage the IT technology in HR.
One of the things that, Mike, that it strikes me as really important there is not just identifying the people to bring them into the agency, but how you keep them in the agency to keep doing the things that you've trained them to do, and also to keep doing the things that the technology can do as it evolves. Am I on the right track there?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you know, we talk a lot about talent acquisition, right? How do we recruit and hire? But, you know, actually retention is just as important, right? It actually helps you not have to continually go out there. So there is a lot of elements of that, and part of that is really getting the employee experience where we need it to be. And I look at AI as a way of getting there, right? I mean, so, you know, from where I stand, that AI is here at this point. It's not going to be here, it's here, right? And we need to really try to instill that culture of, like, how do we make AI actually a part of our work? And I think, to me, this is where HR and the investment in HR makes a huge difference, right? If you think about it from a business function, what is the only function that hits every employee, every manager, every executive, regardless of what level of the organization they are? So really, from an IBM perspective, right, we were kind of client zero for ourselves. We've been doing this for about 7 years now. And they really chose HR. And then I will tell you the adoption rates that we ended up ultimately getting, right? And we got something like 1.7 million HR conversations a year, right? We got like 94% resolution at this point. We didn't get there all at once, by the way. It did take investment. But instilling that culture is really what allowed us to expand AI, right? So we can use it for customer services, which ultimately does lead to a better customer experience for our taxpayers, right? So it really is, I think HR is the right place, and my good friend Traci here,
I'm never disagreeing with you. We all know that.
We're all there.
You talked about the fact that that progress didn't all happen at once. What are the stepping stones that you saw to get to from where you were to where you are today?
That's a great question. So I'll tell you, when we started this thing about 7 years ago, there was this perception, hey, let's just do a big bang. Let's do it, you know, let's get everything right. And we tried to go to look at all the data and all the business processes. And I'll be honest, that was a disaster. It did not work. There was no uptake. There was no adoption. So they really reset, and they were willing to do that reset, and they went on a building block approach, right? Like, let's pick that use case that makes sense. And really, I mean, from my perspective, it was use cases that were high volume. Mm-hmm. There was data available. I think that was really key. 3 is a definitive outcome. That's how actually we started, right? If you start overcomplicating where the outcome of whatever it is you're trying to do is uncertain, you're not setting yourself up for success. But I think especially for the HR and workforce, a moment that matters, right? Let's actually pick the things that people are going to actually care about. Mm-hmm. Right? So we did that, and when we really started that process with employee verification letters and how they balances, right? If you look at it from those perspectives, it requires a lot of data, right, to get it done. And it has a defined outcome. You're either getting the letter or you're not, right? You're either getting a vacation balance or not. And it was a moment that mattered for our employees, right? Because usually that's tied to like trying to get your first home loan, your car loans, right? Or you're planning a holiday. And once we got that and people start to use it, the trust started to build. And that allowed us to continue to build a catalog out. And eventually today, I will tell you, it used to be my muscle memory was, I'm always going to call my HR business partner, right. And you know how that works, right? I got self-service tools, I got all these great tools, but my muscle memory was, I'm going to call HR because it's too hard, easier to do. I will tell you today, my muscle memory is I go to Ask HR first, right? Which is our AI chatbot. And I'll tell you, even at the executive ranks right now, we have a 93% uptake at this point, right? And really it speaks to doing the building blocks, building this out and changing the culture. I think that's my biggest thing I'll tell folks is you have to change the culture. And if you start that with HR, it will leak into the other areas, right? It'll expand to the other business functions like an IT, for instance, like a travel and expense. But eventually it actually gets to the mission work, right? Mm-hmm. So even inside of IBM right now, we've implemented something called the IBM Consulting Advantage, which is literally AI chatbot to help us actually do our consulting work itself. And we've gotten there because we've trusted the AI. But what we introduced it through HR, got the culture there, and now that's where we are today.
Traci, what are the challenges that you are having just within the HR workforce, not the broader IRS workforce? What are the challenges that you're having as far as finding all of the solutions that we've talked about so far on this show?
We really need people that are comfortable with technology, but even more important than that is getting people to trust that we will have the IT investments that we need to actually fully implement. HR is, they love to be technical and to use all the tools that could be available to us, but one of the issues is we rarely invest enough resources in an HR shop, whether it be people or technology. So if we can seize this moment to explain how an area like HR could benefit from the use of AI, it doesn't mean that the people are going away. I know that my colleagues before talked about that.
Yes.
We're always going to have people that need to teach the system how to operate. We constantly are changing the information and the data that comes out with regulation updates. We're always going to have a need for HR specialists, but if there's a way I can make their life easier to allow them to serve the customers, which is the entire agency, it's going to be better for everyone. And I love what Mike said, bringing HR to the table at the beginning rather than at the end to get our input up front goes just such a long way, because we can actually point to the pain points. This is what we need it for. Let us help you get there.
Yeah, that actually follows on to the conversation we had in the last part of this program about including mission delivery partners in these discussions and making sure that they're involved in saying, this is the business process, this is what we really need to do. Maybe these 2 steps we don't need to do anymore. How has that been as far as changing culture at the IRS, or was that how it was when you walked in there year and a half, 2 years ago?
Year and a half. And actually, no, it is a change for us. And I have to say it's an exciting change, and we're seeing the dividends pay off. Having us all come together, we do understand our primary focus for anyone, whether we're back office operations or we're on the phones, it is serving the American taxpayer. So the more we get really good people around the table talking about how we can be solution oriented, not just figure out where there's going to be roadblocks, the better off we are. So you mentioned, and I heard Kashif mention mentioned when we talked about taxpayer services. You know, these are the people that are the front lines. I need to make sure they're well taken care of, whether it be that they're well trained, that they have the tools that they need. If we're introducing a new technology, I'm partnering with the administrator of taxpayer services to make sure we're putting training in place to make their jobs easier, because the easier I can facilitate a conversation between them and the American taxpayer, we're going to resolve those issues quicker, be able to get on to the next phone call, see the increase in our services to the American taxpayer, and demonstrate why these investments work.
When you look at some of the issues that you see across government, Mike, you've been worked with a number of agencies, worked with Traci before at other agencies. How does what the IRS is dealing with and what Traci's described, how does that fit with what you've seen in other organizations? Are the challenges, issues, problems, and so on similar, or are they peculiar on an agency-by-agency basis? Or maybe the answer is yes.
It's a yes to both.
Yeah.
Because I think, as I mentioned to you, like, you know, when you're trying to adopt technology, right, and really to help the end mission, yes, there's some commonalities in terms of, I would say, adoption. What are the right places to start? How do you get them to adopt? How do they get them to use? But agency by agency, their culture is different, right? Their missions are different. So I always try to tell folks there's not a silver bullet to this, right? Like, everyone would love to get the cookbook and say, you know, start here at number 1, number 2, number 3. I say, look, it's good to have a cookbook, right? I mean, it's good to have a partner that's been there and done that. But the reality is, I never come into an agency and tell them, hey, you know, because IRS is very different than Veterans Affairs, which is very different than even GSA, right, where we met before, right? So, you know, if you take that approach and say, like, if you kind of think about what I told you before, and you come in and you say, I want that high volume transaction, right? But I said also the moment that matters, right? And the moment that matters for someone in the IRS employee, going to be very different than the moment that matters for someone in VA, right? So I always suggest that, you know, bring your stakeholders in, right? Try to figure out where the pain points are, figure out what the moment that matters is, so that you actually focus your energies on those types of points. Because if you don't get that one right, then you're not going to get the uptake. And I mean, I always like to tell, and Traci knows what I'm talking about here, is like, we always tell someone, like, hey, you know, pre-AI and all this, what do? We deploy like self-service technologies, right? Manager self-service, right, Traci? We always put that technology out there, and we hope all these managers are going to use these great tools. And what happens?
They call me instead.
Yeah, they call you instead, right? Because look, the technology works. We know it works, but doesn't mean they're going to use it, right? So I think this is where AI gives us a very unique opportunity, right? We get to go one at a time. We get to do it in a very natural language way, where it becomes a much more natural interaction. And I'm hoping that, you know, when we pick the right ones out there and get it right, people start to develop the trust of the technology, and that will help drive the adoption. So I guess, just in recap, no silver bullet, no one right thing for any agency, but there is the right way to do this, I believe.
What are you telling the Traci DiMartinis of the world to think about now that maybe they don't have to deal with today, but is over the horizon for them, is coming down the road for them to think about in the next year or 2 years?
I think that for HR, I'm going to specify for HR, that as technology progresses, right, we always have that holy grail inside of HR, right? Let me free up the bandwidth of my HR business partner so they can be more strategic, right, and they can do all of these things. Well, there's a lot of truth to that. But what I will also say is, the job of the HR professional is going to change. There's going to be new skills that are needed to be in this, right? So this is not about replacement of people, right? If we're truly augmenting our HR professionals, understand there are some new skills that comes along with this. And if we prepare for that in advance, actually it's a win-win for everyone at that point.
Mike, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks very much for joining me. Traci, terrific to have you as always.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you both for coming on today.
Thank you.
You can read more about the workforce at IRS and all the topics we talked about today at fedgovtoday.com. As you've probably learned from this program, the AI landscape in government is already filled with projects now and potential for the future. You'll stay up to date on FedGov Today TV, Sunday mornings at 10:30 on ABC7 in Washington, and on our YouTube channel, on the FedGov Today podcast every Wednesday, wherever you get your podcasts, and always on demand at fedgovtoday.com. Our thanks to the guests from the Internal Revenue Service and from IBM. I'm Francis Rose. Thank you for watching.